We're the book friends that think good.
What does this mean for our life, for our world? Yiggity yeet, my dude. I'm happy to speak. Always happy to think.
I don't know how to do that. I can look into that.
Makes you sound like a book friend that can think good.
It's Jack and it's Weston.
BFTTGs. Yeah.
Jack, I think good. Sometimes I good think, too.
Makes you sound pretty good.
We might want to make it more concise. We are going to attempt to grapple and answer 3 questions. Number 1, what did we learn? Number 2, what did we disagree with? And number 3, what are we going to do about it? I am ready to roll.
I'm in it. Weston, my book friend, tell me, what book is it that we're thinking good about today?
So, my book friend, how has this week been for you?
It has been good. I'm really excited to get into this chapter. I have been thinking about habits again. I woke up thinking about my habits because, as you know, I was a few minutes late recording because Friday is garbage day. And no matter how many different kinds of ways I try to remind myself to put out my trash cans at night, I just will not do it. So I'm like, okay, how do I hack this?
Interesting.
Clear, give me an answer. Let me put my trash cans out at night because I'm always like waking up on Friday like, oh, I need to get the trash out before the garbage man comes.
So I could tell you my habit stack with that because that was one that I analyzed this week.
Please. Yeah, that would be great.
So my habit stack with the trash, because I'm pretty good at it, and I just wrote it down what I normally do, I have to put them out Wednesday nights, right? So Wednesday nights after dinner, and this is actually a habit stack that my wife and I have together, is we usually plan Wednesdays to be leftovers, so we don't have to do any cooking on Wednesdays. So Wednesdays are like easy dinner, leftovers, and then after that, I'm usually the one, I say usually, but we tend to, flip on the dishes, but usually on Wednesdays anyway, I do the dishes, I put everything in the trash, I take the trash out. Well, actually, I take the trash to the litter box room. I redo the litter box every Wednesday and then take the trash out right then and there. And I think that's because one of those, what we're going to get into this chapter with the temptation bundling is once I'm very good about once dinner is done and the dishes are cleaned up, like I'm in relax mode. Like I'm not doing much after that. Like in terms of, chores or things that need to be done. That's the time that, okay, now I'm playing with my son. Now I'm doing other relaxing things, watching a sports game or whatever, playing a video game. So it's kind of like that's my clear cutoff. So then that's my trash on Wednesday night has become my signal to be like, all right, I'm done for the day. So it's like a good temptation bundling for me there, I guess.
That's good. You have a whole family system. I think that's something, one of the things I want to do on my to-do list this week is to read Clear's notes about parenting and marriage, because he does have some articles on his website about that, and I'm very curious what they say. Because we talked about that in the last episode, like, what do you do with your kids, man? Like, because this is something that that my wife and I have been kind of struggling with the trash specifically, is like, she recently implemented a girls' night on Thursday. So we do bedtime together, and then I'm usually there for like the early part of bedtime to kind of make sure she stays asleep while Lindsay goes out with her friends. So it's like, okay, then when do I do the trash? I need to do it probably after, like when I'm alone. Like I should have just done it last night when I was scrolling my phone, but instead did other things.
Yeah.
And then by the time she got home, it was like, okay, bedtime. And it's like, all right, yeah, we'll do the trash in the morning.
Yep, that's. I'm pretty strong with that one, just because I've had that moment like you have in the past. And you wake up and you're like, oh, and you hear the trash truck coming.
Yeah.
Oh, and then you like run downstairs or wherever, go. And try to get, because if you talk about habits stacking. If you stack up 2 weeks of trash like that usually sucks. So
it's probably how our ancient ancestors felt when there were like predators in the night.
Totally. That's our modern day equivalent.
Yeah. I miss the garbage man.
Yeah.
Oh man, we live privileged lives.
Yeah. I'm also, you're not quite to this point yet.
Yeah.
But like my son loves doing that with me. Like we've gotten him to the point where he loves doing chores and stuff too, which I pray that we keep going with him.
Yeah.
But like, dude, like one of his favorite things to do is do the dishes. Like he loves putting the little soap pod into the dishwasher, closing it. He knows all the buttons to push on the top now, and then he gets to like close it and do it. Like he literally does it autonomously.
Sweet.
We had a little brunch with some neighbors last Sunday, and they were like amazed after brunch when people were doing dishes, and which was awesome. But anyways, I cooked, so they all did the dishes, and then we're like, all right, Dax, time to do the soap. And then he just like runs over, stops playing with the other kids, runs over and like does it, and he's like all excited, and then pushes it, and the other parents were just like, "What? How did
the other kids are like?"
I'm just like, I don't know. He loves doing it. I don't know. He loves to help. So I hope you get that blessing too with your young child.
Yeah, I have been thinking a lot about my kid, and we'll talk about it in this episode because today we're covering just one chapter, something a little bit different. Chapter 8, How to Make a Habit Irresistible, which is about dopamine and the dopamine spike and cravings. And ultimately, this chapter is all about Taco Bell's marketing plan. This is the first thing I thought of. I was like, oh, yeah, I hear the bell. Yeah. I want a nacho taco.
That's like literally their recent ad campaign is all about the queue. Have you noticed that? I actually thought about that when I was watching an NBA playoff game the other day, because their recent ad campaign is literally people doing other things, and then they'll hear the Taco Bell ding, and then they'll literally look and see Taco Bell and go to it no matter what. Like their recent ad campaign is literally that, dude. It's literally Pavlov's dog, literally training people to do that.
Well, and they use words like crave. Like it's the crave box. Yeah. They've got it down. I mean, it really is. It's like, it's not about the quality of the taco or the food. It is about desiring it. And they have tapped that 100%. And it it made me think of when I was last over at your house and Coco Melon came on, and your son is like, Coco Melon.
Dude, immediately.
Yeah.
And
it's like
it becomes more obvious as the kids get older too, like what sounds do things and what actions do things. Like I'm sure you have this with your dogs, but man, anytime I get in the corner of my kitchen and I'm holding something, my cat believes that it's tuna and that she's going to get some, right? And she's runs over, rubs up on my legs and stuff. I love you, Dad.
Yeah, my dogs pretty much anticipate any movement from me as a potential cue that they will get food. So they're just like constantly watching me like a hawk.
Gosh.
It's funny. Yeah. Okay, so let's get into it. How to make a habit irresistible. So let's just start with, we already talked about what the chapter is about. Weston, my book friend, what did you learn?
My first thing was on page 102, where I just had never heard of supernormal stimuli.
Yes.
And I said that in a lot of instances, it's actually counterintuitive to me now because I've become such a cynic. Like I said, capitalism and my like feelings about capitalism have made this sort of stimuli make me hesitate, actually discredit it or laugh at it rather than be intrigued by it. Like that Taco Bell stuff, I get the feeling more of like that works on other people. Other people are idiots. Like that's like that's my natural reaction to it at this point. But I know that was a learned behavior of mine over years and years of like untraining myself to do that stuff. Because I mean, as you know, I definitely fell trapped to that when we were younger.
Oh yeah, I think there are totally things where this is probably one of those things where we have insane blind spots. For example, one thing for me is I have never felt the like poisonous barbs of Instagram. You know what I'm talking about? Like
I can see how other people would.
How Instagram can like grab you and like make you fill you with jealousy and stuff like this. Like, oh, you know, they're look at all of these beautiful people or these amazing things my friends are doing or whatever. And I've always had the check down sort of like you do, where I'm like, yeah, but it's just like one photo from their entire life, you know, or like it's probably hyper edited, you know, like these photos are edited or like,
Dude,
you know,
being a parent,
whatever.
Being a parent, it becomes apparent, right? Like those photo shoots you have with kids, you get like one good shot out of like 15, 20 at best, just terrible shots, or like, you know, you like we had this one photo shoot, not this Easter but last Easter, where we went to this little bunny farm, and my son got to like pose with like a super fat large rabbit.
Bunny, yeah.
And with
I
like
remember
all
seeing
this
those.
Easter decor, right? And it was like we had to sit there for like 15 minutes just to get one good shot of him looking at the camera and actually smiling, because for the majority of that 15 minutes he was just like, I don't want to touch it, I don't want to touch it, and like freaking out and like running away, and we're like dude, that like I feel like
it's
being
literally
a parent now, every time I see something on social media or some post like that too, I was like, I know what really happened.
Yep. It's literally the softest, cuddliest creature on planet Earth. Like, do not be afraid of this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's so funny. Like, yeah, that is totally true. Like some of my daughter's best smiles are right before a meltdown.
Oh.
So she'll be like, yeah. So yeah, I mean, yeah, absolutely. So super normal stimuli. What Weston's getting at there is this study that this guy Timbergen did, where he basically trolled a bunch of birds. He like snuck up on their nests and like put giant beaks in front of the chicks so that they would mistake them for like mother's beak, but like super exaggerated. And the best example is the gray-legged goose, where he found that if you roll a goose egg away from a nest, the goose will snatch it and put it back in the nest. But that works with any round object. So, you know, you think a goose egg is like 10 times bigger than a chicken egg, but if you use a volleyball, the goose will grab the volleyball, put it back in its nest, and sit on it. And the point that he makes with this is humans are also prone to fall for exaggerated versions of reality. The examples he gives are Instagram, photo editing, the fizz in sodas, potato chips, junk food. Right? Like junk food is super saturated with salt, acid, fat, which draws us in. And, you know, we have one of the points that he brought up that we've read about before when we were talking about sapiens before we started this podcast was we have the brains of our ancestors, but temptations they never had to face.
Yeah.
And what he's talking about is like the hunter-gatherer mentality of humanity, where like you see a tree ripe with figs. What's the most logical thing to do? Well, eat all of them, right? Because who knows if you'll see that again. That's what junk food is for us. Like we still have that mindset, those chemicals in our brain that tell us like, oh yeah, store this. But when we're getting Big Macs every single day, that's a bad thing.
Yeah. And arguably like every food, think about just like even the produce at grocery stores, dude. It's all picked before you get to pick it to be the best, or it's like sprayed with some wax or something that makes it look shinier, makes it look better than it was when it was like on the actual vine or tree. Like it's like everything has become oversaturated. That same idea, the supernormal stimuli, has created a lot of divides among the genders, specifically tied to porn, I think.
Yes. Yeah. I'm so glad that he talked about porn in this section, because like as a pastor, it's the number one thing I counsel men about, hands down.
I mean, yeah, the temptation is right there. And like the crazy thing about it too, is just like how easy it is to access it nowadays. Mm-hmm. And the freeness, like there's not even like a paywall to stop you.
Yeah.
You know, it's so difficult for young men to get over that hump or to avoid it. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, he talks about, there's a quote here on page 103 by a scientist, Stephen Goynet, who says, he's a neuroscientist who studies eating behavior and obesity, but he says, we've gotten too good at pushing our own buttons. And he links that to porn. And I think that that's like, yeah, I mean, that is really an area where we have temptations that our ancestors never had to face, and we're still working with this like biological machinery that tells us like, oh yeah, this is a good thing. Your brain is like, this is good. But the reality is like for your soul, it's terrible.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And not even just the gratification part of it, but what it does
Mhm.
to our body dysmorphia, because it creates this situation where men feel like they
That's huge.
have to look a certain way, and women think they have to look a certain way, which has led to all these plastic surgeries. And like, I don't know. I'm just glad that I've gotten to a point where I understand all that a little bit more. And like, I'm not attracted to that look at all. Like
Mm,
the over exaggerated lips, and like it's just like,
yeah.
I don't know, man. It's I can
It's crazy.
see, yeah,
It's crazy how much it's infiltrated even non like even non-porn places like
yeah,
Instagram, like
yeah,
takes all
exactly.
of the imagery from that. It's crazy. If anybody out there is struggling or needs like a resource for this, one of the best ones that I've found is Your Brain on Porn by I think it's Gary, what is his last name? Wilson maybe. He's a neuroscientist and he looks at all of the deleterious effects of what that does to the brain, and it's a uh, very convincing book that breaks down how this stuff works in depth, like dopamine reception. The main thing that is really troubling about it is um, what it does to people in terms of their actual experiences of enjoyment in real life. Like it totally mutes and dumbs down those things and creates marital conflict in a very real way. So very serious issue. Another thing that I like to point out always when talking about this topic is it really is a justice issue. Like a lot of people end up in that industry against their will
Mm.
for various different reasons. And some of it is against their will, like they're forced into it. Women are forced into it and abused in that industry. But also a lot of people end up against their will economically. It's just like the only option they have to make money or that they think they have to make money. And so they take it. A lot of people do it for totally, you know, um, like vanity related reasons or there are all kinds of other reasons that people
Yeah.
get into it. It's just there is a huge element there where um, it is unjust, and you can't really tell the difference between something that's above board and something that's not in
Right.
terms of like
Right.
consent and all of that kind of thing. So
The
so
next
there's
thing I
that.
really had a note
Oral
about
sensation.
was then the dopamine spike chart. I thought this was very interesting and
Yeah.
very true.
Yeah, that was my first learning was the thing that for me was really revelatory here was you hear about dopamine all the time, right? People talk about it. It's very like in vogue and like in the news and stuff. Um, but I didn't realize necessarily that dopamine spiked in this way where like it really has to do with anticipation. So it's more about pleasure for unrealized experiences, which is very interesting that like dopamine releases before you do a thing, not as you're doing a thing or after, though it does release after as well. That was just something that was very, very interesting to me. Like he talks about these rats and he says like they like depleted these rats of dopamine and then gave them sugar and they still like experienced pleasure, but they didn't have desire. That was on page 105, and I thought that that was fascinating.
Hmm. Yeah, I think my big note with this whole section on the dopamine spike chart was this reminded me that most of life is about managing expectations.
Mm.
And to put it through my educator lens, I said I've seen enough things happen with students at this point that I rarely have expectations for them. And perhaps that's why I've been able to avoid being disappointed by them often. Like something that happens a lot in education conversations and discussions in my experience is that people express their disappointment in students. They're like, oh, I helped them with this and this and this, and I gave them all these tools, and they still messed up, or they still didn't get it. And they're like disappointed in that. And um, I just think that I've done a good job and learned a lot about like you never know exactly when that is going to happen. So managing those expectations is a huge part of not just finding success, but avoiding disappointment and avoiding that negative spike that happens with the dopamine in like the third stage. Because it's like, I think that, again, I was putting it through my educator lens, and it's like the first time that you have an interaction with a student, tell them something and they absorb it and they learn, you get a huge dopamine spike as the teacher, because you're like, yes, dude, they're getting it, and like they're learning, and I was helpful, right?
Yeah.
And then you get that craving because, like, say, you know, whatever the next student, the next group you have, like, okay, I know this worked for that first group, so I'm getting a dopamine spike because I'm anticipating telling them this because I know they're gonna like do well with it, right?
Yeah.
And then they don't, right? And then it flattens out, and you're like, oh no. And then the third thing happens where you're anticipating it, and then they get worse because that happens a lot, and they like totally get ideas confused.
Yeah.
And then you fall into this kind of depression as a teacher, right? Where you're like, oh my gosh, I did everything the same that I did with the other group or with the other student, and then they didn't get it. I suck. And
yes, that is so huge. Where you have like this, like the cue craving response reward with the dopamine spikes. Where the first time it happens, it's at reward. The second time, it's at craving, and then you might not get that reward. But then there's that, like, the worst is C, where it's like you get the response, but you don't get the reward, and dopamine depletes. Like, that's the worst feeling. And what I thought about immediately when I read this was like, that's like marriage. Like, the problem that I most often see in marriages is unspoken expectations.
Yeah.
Your spouse can never meet an expectation you don't speak out loud and share with them. And this is where people get into lots of trouble, is like, I want you to read my mind. Yeah. Like, I want you to understand this is what I desperately need or desire. But the thing is, people don't talk about those enough, I think. It's something that Lindsay and I heard in our premarital counseling that we have carried through our marriage. It's been extremely beneficial to us to keep in mind that today's unspoken expectations are tomorrow's disappointments.
Yeah.
Because any expectation you don't speak, like, others don't know is there.
Yeah. And, I mean, dude, I was the bad example of that just a few nights ago. I thought that my wife and I were at an understanding of something. And we ended up not being at that understanding, right? And and again, I know this is wrong, and this is why I hope Clear gets into this, because as soon as I said it, I knew I was wrong, which I'm sure a lot of men can relate to. But
Sure.
But I said something along the lines of, well, you know what this is about. And my wife was like, I genuinely don't, right? And like that was one of those unspoken expectations where as soon as she said that, I was like, oh, ugh, God, why, like cringing hard at myself right there in the moment. I'm like, why did I, because I expected something. And so I totally agree. I think it's a huge thing in marriages. It's a huge thing in any relationships, really. Because I see that happen a lot at jobs too. There's been a lot of things in my job where my principal or a parent is having like some sort of unspoken expectation about what is going on in class or what I need to do or what happened already or whatever, and they don't get spoken about until afterwards, and then there's this huge disappointment or whatever, and that's definitely something that you need to continually work on with yourself and managing your own expectations and not making people read your mind. That's at least in my experience. I have to constantly work on making sure that I'm not anticipating people reading my mind, because we're all so different. Everyone sees things through such a different perspective that you need to get everyone's perspective.
And people's perspectives change over time.
Yes.
That's why like marriage is a really good example of like, it's important to level set regularly and be like, hey, like, I don't know, there were all kinds of things when my wife and I initially got married that have changed since becoming parents, where it's like, my perspective just changes on things. It's kind of like a big thing for me has always been like lights in the bedroom. Like I cannot sleep with any like sliver of light. I'm just like very sensitive in that way.
Mm-hmm.
But my my wife is not like that. But now after having a kid, I'm like, whatever, I'll sleep anywhere.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you'll take it wherever you can get it.
Yeah. Yeah.
My wife was shocked one time when I was blasting metal music in my garage gym, and like I was going through something. And I do this from time to time where if I'm feeling a certain way or whatever in the middle of my workout, I'll just stop, right? Because we need those breaks.
Mm-hmm.
And I was literally like meditating on my bench, like laying down meditating
Yeah.
with like blasting metal music. And my wife was like, how did you even do that? And I was just like, I don't know. Different stimuli, I guess.
Yeah, right. Yeah, like just that different, like you catch somebody on a different day, you'll see something else. So the level set is an important tool there.
Yeah.
Whether it's in a relationship or in a job. Like, I think this is one of the reasons that employee burnout is so high, is like expectations change as the company changes, but like the employee doesn't really like reflect that back to the employer or the manager or whatever. Say like, listen, I know we're trying to triple revenue now, but last year we were doubling revenue. So my workload has increased substantially in the last 2 weeks. And the thing is, like, we check down on those things like way too late. Like It needs to be like, whoa, my work is getting out of control. I should do something now, not like, we'll see how this plays out, which I think is one of the reasons we end up with bad habits, like Clear talks about.
Absolutely. If you're always in a reactive stance to those things, you're not going to have the best habits. Like we need to get into a position where you can be proactive. And that's been something that's been so difficult throughout this pandemic, is like everyone's needed to be reactive to it. So they needed to adjust, and there's been a ton of bad habits developed because of that aspect. Just being forced to be reactive rather than proactive about certain things.
Yeah.
Because there's been only so much you can be proactive about, right? I mean, when things change, like on a dime, you need to be able to react. And I mean, I've had so many plans the last few years. I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this. So many plans, and I'm just speaking from like a lesson plan standpoint.
Yeah.
But that just like instantly, like at the drop of a dime, just get thrown out the window, right? And it's just like, nope. Not possible. Not even possible, right? So it's not even like adjusting your expectations for what it could be. It's like, no, you have to throw that thing out. Like, that thing is gone now. And it's a very difficult thing to deal with, because that emotionally drains people. If you're always reacting and not being proactive, you cannot give your time. You can't give yourself time and space to appropriately adjust, like we were talking about last week, that commute time, right? That time to set yourself, that time to change the space you're in, the time to reset, like you're saying, your mentality. A lot of that has just been stripped away.
Ooh, that's so true. Yeah, and that's like one of the things that was revelatory to me in this chapter that actually speaks into that really well is on page 108, he talks about how our neural circuitry is, your brain's neurocircuitry allocates more for wanting rewards than for liking them, which I think speaks to that in a really significant way. He talks about like how we have these like hedonic hotspots, these like areas that are small that are like, oh yeah, I really like this. Much more of our brain is wanting, like desire is the engine that drives behavior. And the way I think about that in terms of what you were just talking about is this reality that like we become a slave to our behaviors because of our desires, where it's like, those cues have been hyper exaggerated in the pandemic with failed plans, where it's like that stress response is right under the surface and our desire to like curb that stress is right there. And so I think this like brings out this temptation, like we talked about in last chapter. The best self-controlled people aren't like temptation wizards, they're not like super powered. They're just people who avoid it. And the thing is, like, this has been our stress response is brought to the surface in a way with all of these canceled plans and challenges and this like much quicker pace of life that we can't stop to think about like, okay, what am I doing with my desires? How are my desires driving me? You know, what are my cues doing to me? And like creating stress in me that my brain is seeking to solve that problem. Like we just don't have the space to analyze that or even like face that down.
Yeah, it's been tough, and pretty much the whole world has been forced to adjust.
Yeah.
And a lot of people's habits have completely changed. So I think that was good for us to, be reading this book, because I think I had some of that work to do as well in adjusting myself back.
Oh, yeah.
And moving forward, right?
Well, it's funny because the question is like, well, what do we push back against, right? So we talked about some learnings, but what do we push back about? And he talks about temptation bundling. And the whole concept of temptation bundling is you're more likely to find a behavior attractive if you get to do one of your favorite things at the same time. Gives the example of a guy who wanted to watch Netflix, but also needed to ride a stationary bike. So he rigged up a computer program that only plays Netflix if he's riding his bike at a certain clip, which is like brilliant, right?
Right, yeah.
And I was like, my initial note on this was, temptation bundling, be careful. But then my second note about this was Weston is very good at doing this. Like this was something that I immediately identified as like, this is how your habits operate for the most part.
Yeah, I wrote down a bunch of examples actually, if you want me to share them.
Yeah,
things, because I agreed with that, and I was like, yeah, this is pretty much how I've structured a lot of things in my life. And it's funny, this is just another concept that like I have naturally done. And I had never had a name for it, I guess. And this book is illuminating a name for it.
Yeah. Just before Weston gets to sharing his examples, here's the formula. The formula is habit stacking plus temptation bundling is after current habit, I will habit I need. Or after habit I need, I will habit I want. So, or no, that's like a flow. After current habit, I will habit I need. After habit I need, I will habit I want. So that's how you put the two together. But really, temptation bundling is just habit I need, habit I want. So
yeah, because I would say a lot of my examples are not necessarily sequentially, but they're simultaneously. So I'll give some examples of that, I guess. And I do have a few other notes about this concept, but like some examples for me are like, I've grown to love cooking dinner, and one of the reasons that I've grown to love cooking is because usually I listen to music while I'm doing it. And so I have this other habit stack that I do most weekends, where I've noticed on Apple Music that most of the new music comes out on Fridays. So I will pick out like some albums or some songs that have come out that pique my interest, or by some of my artists or some artists that I haven't heard of before. And I have this playlist of just new music, and I will listen to that on the weekends, and then from that filter those songs into various playlists, like a workout playlist, a chilling playlist, things like that. Like I have various moods, I guess, that I will then filter them into, or if they don't make it through that filter, all right, I listened to it and I didn't like it, right? So I use cooking a lot of times to do that. And on a lot of Sundays, I meal prep for the week to make my week easier to deal with. And so it's kind of like I'm cooking for a good, maybe 2 to 3 hours. So I have the time there that I'm listening to music, and as I'm cooking, I'm like, oh, I really like that song. I want to add that to this playlist. Oh, that song. So it's like I'm doing a hobby while I'm doing something that's necessary for me to stay on track with my health goals. And it's become a fun thing for me where, like I talked about last week, you want to get to the point, or at least I want to get to the point where I want to look forward to what I'm doing in as many aspects of my life as possible. Like I want there to be something that goes along with it that I really enjoy doing. So cooking, and I do the same thing when I'm doing yard work, especially now that it's getting to that yard work time of the year. I'll have that playlist going, have my headphones on, and then all of a sudden when I'm doing yard work, I'm loving it, because I'm like, dude, I'm just, flowing, listen to the music. And there have been several times where I've had to stop what I'm doing and go inside and like share something with my wife, like a music or an artist or something.
Yeah.
but it makes it fun, right? And then I actually do the same thing when you talked about that the guy who rigged up the TV.
Yeah.
I talked about it a little bit.
Yeah.
I think in one of the episodes, but yeah, I have my treadmill and I have my TV right there, and like that's when I watch interesting things or listen to other podcasts, or sometimes I'll, because I also do a little walk after dinners. I'll have a sports game on that I'm interested in and watch part of the game while I'm walking, to make it so it's like, okay, I'm not just sitting on my couch eating snacks,
Right.
getting fat.
Yeah.
I'm like
Yeah.
still doing the thing I want to do, which is watch the game, but I've switched it to a healthier habit of walking instead of doing
Yes.
that thing. I also do the same thing. I'm the primary laundry folder in our house, and so
Yeah.
I'll do the same thing with the music while I'm folding laundry. That's usually a lot shorter one though. That usually only takes like 20, 25 minutes. But yeah, so I've stacked all these things that I want to do with things that I need to do. And
Yeah.
I put that a bad temptation bundling I have that I need to get
Ooh.
rid of is watching sports and eating snacks like
Oh.
after,
Yes.
because I'm a big NBA fan, so I've been following I'm a big Suns fan, so I've been following the Suns playoffs and last year too. And like, yeah, I'll just like sit down and like, all right, the Suns game is on, and then I'll find myself just being like, I want to eat some popcorn too, or like I want to do this, I want to
Yeah.
eat these cookies too, and like that's usually
Yeah.
when I fall. That's when I'm at my most vulnerable to overeat, is when there's something I want to watch afterwards. Because it's like if I'm creating a video or if I'm playing a video game, I don't have the hands to snack, so I don't have that like desire that we've been talking about. Whereas like if I'm just watching a sports game, I'm kind of like Ricky Bobby, dude. I'm like, what do I do with my hands?
Yeah.
They better
Right.
they better be
Totally.
feeding my mouth
Yeah.
something, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's with TV in general, is like you just sit there passively. I don't know if I believe this. I would have to like really look at this, but I've heard that your brain is less active watching TV than it is when you're asleep.
Oh, I wouldn't doubt that. I wouldn't doubt that because your brain has to, and again, I don't know, but I wouldn't doubt it because your brain has to create the dreams that
Yeah.
you're in, right? Usually in dreams, you're like actively creating the world around you. So I would
Yeah.
definitely
Oh, yeah.
imagine your brain is more active.
Well, and that's something we know about our brains, right? Our brains are constantly searching for something to do. They're never inactive. Like
Right.
sleep is a very active time for your brain, which is very fascinating. But yeah, I was thinking about you, like you often will walk and catch up on your group texts. You'll walk while you're playing your Switch. Like you do things that where you put habits you need to do with habits you want to do often. And I was like, oh, Weston's got this down.
I honestly I felt like that a little bit, but I did say I do want to apply it more.
Yeah.
Because
I've always,
it works.
I have used this haphazardly in my life. Starting when we lived up at Whitworth, I would reward myself by finishing my homework and then going to Taco Bell. And I still do this to this day. I'll be like, man, that was a good work day. I'm going to go get a cheesy bean and rice burrito and a large Baja Blast. Like, I still do this. And it's not necessarily bad because it's metered to like, okay, this is saved for very productive occasions. But it could very easily get out of hand where it's like, get this reward when you do this thing for things that, like, I think one of the cautions I had about this is like, but the thing must be worth it.
Yes.
Right? Like, it must be like habit you need that you really need, because we can trick ourselves into saying like, oh, I deserve this thing because I did something that's sort of similar, right? Like a good example is, I don't know, say you have a job that's very like, very discreet, like you're an architect, right? Like architects have various renders that they need to do of a design. You tell yourself like, when I finish a project, I am going to do this thing. And let's just make it like a very big example. Like, let's say I'm going to go to Six Flags or I'm going to go to Hawaii when I finish a building project, right? That's a great like reward for yourself. And if you're an architect, you can probably, one, afford to do that. And two, you finish projects so rarely that that actually makes sense to do. But the thing is, like, you can slowly slide down to that to say like, oh, I'm going to take a day off when I finish a render. And like pretty soon you're burning through all of your vacation time because you are accomplishing smaller and smaller tasks. And so the two notes I had about this, because I had a little bit of pushback to it, was temptation bundling could get really out of hand. So watch that slippery slope. And the other thing that I noted about it was like that phrase is challenging. Like, I think that it should be called like reward bundling rather than temptation bundling. Because like we are playing off of that mechanism in our brain, but we don't want to let ourselves like slide to that level of saying like, I'm just going to give myself over to my basest desires when I accomplish anything good. Like, that's not healthy direction to go.
Yeah, I totally agree. That was my pushback as well on this. And before I get into that, Allie and I still do that too with Taco Bell, dude. There'll be times like, usually it's like Friday nights.
Yeah.
And we look at each other after work and we're like, I don't want to cook. Do you want to cook? No. You want Taco Bell? Yeah. Like on like an especially tough week of school.
Yeah.
We do that too. We'll reward ourselves with some Taco Bell.
Yeah. Well, Taco Bell has occupied that space in our lives for dopamine.
Yeah.
You've done it.
But anyway, so get back to the pushback. I agree with you. And I said this can easily lend itself to a concept that I learned about mid-pandemic, so it's summer of 2020.
Ooh.
When everyone was trying to cope, right?
Yeah.
I heard about the concept of toxic positivity, and that it reminded me of this, where I said it gets very possible to be too positive about things, and that can lead itself into these habits, right? If you're tempting yourself too much, right? And that's why I started to think about it. I know it's not a perfect analogy, but the toxic positivity, not acknowledging your failings or your hardships or any of those like struggles that you've had can come across as very naive or disingenuous or honestly just plain stupid, right? And again, to put it through an education lens, I said it became an issue in education when administration is constantly like praising teachers for all the work that we're trying to do in the pandemic, but then failing to give us like actual support because there's no support to be given. So my note on this was, and I think this leads into or dovetails with what you're saying about tempting ourselves, is that lip service can often lead to resentment. And we can do that to ourselves.
That's good.
At least that's something I've found with myself, is when I've had a negative habit stack or a negative temptation bundle or a like you're saying, a temptation bundle that's happening too often, right?
Yeah, right.
The reward is happening too often. I've resented myself. I look back and I reflect on myself. I'm like, oh, why was I so dumb? Like, why am I doing this to myself?
Yeah.
And it can lead to resentment in others and in yourself. That was my note on it. And another example I had was when I was younger, I used to do it as a studying technique, kind of like what you were mentioning. I said I would use treats as rewards for myself, like a rat in a freaking maze, dude. And I didn't think about it at that time, but it's like, yeah, I would like do it with like Oreos, where it's like if I got 3 questions right on like I specifically remember this for SAT prep. Like if I got like 5 questions right on an SAT prep in a row, I'd be like, sweet, that's an Oreo, and then eat an Oreo right away, and then do some more practice problems. So
yes.
I mean, it can be dangerous, dude. It can be dangerous because then at the end of the night, it's like, oh yeah, I did a lot of studying and I worked really hard, but I also ate like 25 Oreos.
Here's the thing too. Here's the thing that's interesting about a behavior rhythm like that is at some point your SAT will be over, but you'll still eat Oreos, right?
Exactly.
Like you'll just find new cues for that behavior. And I think that that's the caution here is like the behaviors that we want to do, given the fact that our brain is all wanting and dopamine is all about desire and our brains just dump dopamine all the time. We have to really think very hard about linking things that we need to do with things that we want to do in ways where the want is less than the thing we need. That I think is a really key point of this is like, yes, like totally, veg out or do something unhealthy, but make sure it's worth it. Like a good example is you want to reward yourself for a workout with like a treat, like don't make it a milkshake. Like you've just replaced everything that you did, like make it something rewarding that's not going to undo all of the good that you've done.
I tried to do that for a while, and it was like mildly successful. But then I fell into the trap of rewarding too much. I would make my own homemade frozen yogurt, and it was delicious, and I loved it. And it was like super high protein, way better than like actual ice cream.
Yeah, recipe in the links.
I mean, I might be able to do it, but I would like set aside. I would do that thing on Sunday, right, where I make it for the whole week. But then I'd eat the whole tub by like Wednesday. Right. And, and then it's like, well, that was supposed to last twice this long. Ooh.
Yep.
But yeah, and I realized too when I was taking notes here that this related to me, or this made me think about the research behind taking more frequent breaks from things, and how that actually increases productivity. I do these sorts of things with my students, and I've started doing them with my son now that he's kind of getting to that stage a little bit, or understanding a little bit. When my wife and I get, have a hard day, like one of those Taco Bell nights or whatever.
Yeah.
We really like to limit our son's screen time. He's only 3. But what we've created with him, a habit stack that we've created, is he has to read 5 books before he can read like watch a 15-minute show, right? And usually just him knowing, he like actually knows that now, he'll come home and he'll just start reading because he's like, I want to watch a show, but I know that I need to read 5 books.
Yeah, it's so funny, man. I did this as a kid. For a while, my mom was getting her master's when I was in 5th grade. So I would go over to a friend's house after school. And my friend was the kind of kid who was like, school's out, fun time,
Yeah.
And I had this habit from the time I was in like 1st grade. My dad helped me implement this, where it's like, okay, Jack, you're going to have homework now. So here's what you do. You get home, you do your homework, then you can do whatever you want. And I was like, that's pretty sweet. And when I was in 1st grade, that took like 5 minutes. You do like a couple of activities with your parents, and then you can just play. And I had been doing that from the time I was 6 to the time I was 11. So by the time I'm 11, I have 5th grade homework. I come home and then do like, I don't know, less than an hour of homework, probably 30 minutes, a couple spelling drills, a couple like like a sheet of math problems. And I was basically done, and then I would hang out with my friend's older brother playing video games when his parents got home, and they were like, why is your homework not done? It was always a fight. And they were like, he was like being forced to do his homework for hours. He couldn't concentrate on it because it was like, this is keeping me from doing my fun thing. For me, it was just habitual. It was like, I'm done with school. Now I do my homework. Then I have fun. And it made life way less stressful to do that.
Yeah. And I mean, maybe, did you get to that point where you were like excited to do homework because of what came after?
Yes, absolutely. Like I just never had a problem with it. Like, like I remember my friend's parents being like, why, what, like, look at Jack. He just does his homework. And I was like, well, yeah, because then I can do whatever I want. It just makes sense.
Right. The reward needs to be worth it. Like you were saying.
And I had it in my mind as a formula. Like, well, I have to. Like, I have to because then I'm free.
See?
Like, if
you had that temptation bundle, dude.
Yes, exactly. And that was something I carried with me all the way through high school. Like, one of the things I did in college that I tell people sometimes, they're like, what? Is I never did homework on Saturday. And that was my reward, was like, listen, I'm going to do all of my homework during the week, and then Saturday I'm free. And I just made it a habit that I never had anything to do on Saturday. Sometimes I had extremely late nights. I'd be up on Thursday till 2 a.m. cramming homework or whatever, but it was worth it to have those Saturdays free.
Can I You know what? I didn't think about this while reading the chapter, but can I bring the example up of our First Corinthians class we took together?
Oh yeah,
This
totally.
is this is a perfect example of Jack being way more studious than me. Growing up, school just happened to come really easy to me, so I
Yeah.
never really had to like worry about getting my homework done. I wasn't as regimented as Jack on that for sure. And we took this class together at Whitworth that was just a January class, just a month long. And the way the professor designed it was he gave us all a binder at the beginning of the month and said, we're going to talk and have these discussions, and if you follow along throughout the class every day, like you'll generally have like a 70 already, but then you need to do extra stuff within this binder. It was really cool because he gave all these options, and it was very clear about like, okay, if I do this activity, do it well, I'll get this grade or whatever. And basically by the end of the month, whatever you had done in the binder, you just turn in the binder at the end. So like there wasn't any assignments you had to do along the way, at least not that I
Yeah.
remember. It was
Yeah,
just
no.
all about the binder at the end, and then he would grade it all at once, and you get your
Yep.
score, right?
And to be clear, there were 100 assignments, so there were a ton
Yeah.
of things you could do.
Yeah.
And it was like all about percentage. Like
Yes.
if you did, 50 of the things, you got X grade. If you did 60 of the things, you got Y grade. Yeah.
So and again, we were living together, so I was witnessing this every day, and I was the bad example here. Jack would spend after this class, he would spend, I don't know, 2 to 3 hours, I guess, a night working on one of the activities or whatever, making sure he was progressing. I did not.
Yeah.
I was procrastinating like
Yeah.
the worst student you could be.
Yeah.
And it got to the last night. We had to turn in the binder the next day, and I hadn't done anything. And Jack had done everything already, and he like wasn't stressed at all, obviously.
Yeah. Yeah.
And basically, I had taken the opposite approach, where every night Jack was working on homework, literally in the same room as me. So I can't it's not like I didn't see it or I wasn't prompted to do it. I was literally just like, nah, I don't want to do that. And like I would play like Madden or Call of Duty or whatever we were playing at the time with with other buddies. And then that last night came, and I had to like stay up all night, and I did as much of the binder as I could do. I did not even get close to finishing it, but I did as much of the binder as I could do, and I had stayed up until like 4 or 5 a.m. whatever, finishing this total cram sesh, totally just like brain dump.
Yeah.
And Jack did better than me in this class,
Yeah.
which came
No,
to
that was-
surprise of no one.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Well, and that was the 1% gains process too. Like it wasn't just temptation bundling, because I wanted to do all the same things Weston was doing, and I did. I just did them after I finished my thing, and it was a minor inconvenience day to day rather than a huge inconvenience all at once.
Yeah.
Or like a huge inconvenience that you'll be dealing with for a long time. Like, I think this is one of the things that people don't understand about their bad habits is like a bad habit's just a bad habit until it's something more. Like a good example is homework, right? You don't do your homework, you will fail school. Like quarter to quarter, class to class, not a big deal. But you go out into the workforce and you have a C average, like you're not going to do well.
Well, you're not
like,
used to doing that work. You're not used to being in that productive mode, and you're not going to do well at a job.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Or, in college, you're not going to have the requisite knowledge to do the thing that you were supposed to be studying, Same thing with a habit like smoking, right? That something he brings up a lot in this book. And it's like, you like smoking a cigarette a day, really not that big a deal, but you develop lung cancer and that's a problem, like it's a much bigger problem when it stacks than day to day.
Yeah. And the thing that I've had to realize is that anything that you do on a daily basis adds up fast. Even if it's just 5 minutes a day, like that adds up fast in terms of how much you're actually doing it. So, yeah.
And that's the nice thing about that is that's true for positive things too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Like, I've been working on a game on the back burner, and I've been taking that approach just a little bit every day, and it's not very much. And I use it as a reward, kind of like, oh, I've done the things I need to do. Now I can do the thing I want to do. Very much this temptation bundling type thing, but it's for a project I want to work on. And I've seen very steady improvement over a short period of time because I've been doing a little bit every day, not a lot all at once.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
So
Well,
one thing I got to kind of with this and with that concept, and I didn't say it was a specific disagreement, but I'm more just wondering where Clear goes with these habit stacks and temptation bundles getting stale. Because that's something that I've seen in my life in terms of like, I'll set something up, I'll feel really good about it, and I'll do it for 2 to 3 weeks or a month or two, and then like for whatever reason, it starts to feel stale and forced, and then I find myself, retracting myself from it, or just like I'll be like, I can't do it anymore. I'll just like freak out and like revert back to an old habit stack or completely change it to something that's not nearly as effective, and I get this feeling of like, why do I need to psychologically trick myself into doing this when I understand it's better, and when I've done it, it's been better? Why do we feel, and maybe it's just me, but why do I feel the need to just naturally self-sabotage? So I wonder if Clear gets into any of that in the coming chapters of, after we set these up, how do you continue? How do you sustain it?
Yeah, I hope he does talk about that too, because like dopamine does flatten, right? Like the reward just starts not to hit the same, and because of that, like we need to, be adaptive with some of these things. So I'm really curious how he does address that.
Yeah.
What did you learn from this? What are you taking?
I am taking that I want to layer on temptation bundles into my notes for my habit stack so far. So I've just been taking some notes so far on like just identifying stuff so far. I'm not really looking at trying to change anything until we finish this book and kind of see it all the way through. So I've just been taking a catalog of what I am currently doing so that I can read the rest of the book and see. But that's what I'm going to do. Add my temptation bundles onto my habit stack notes that I currently do. What about you?
I think I think same thing. I want to work it into my work habits. Use temptation bundling to say thing I need to do, thing I want to do, and balance my work that way. It's something I'm not currently doing, but I think like pleasurable activities, things like reading, things like stuff like that I genuinely enjoy. Put those behind the things like scheduling, which are just tedious chores. I want to try to use that in my workflow, see how that works. But something that I've been considering, another thing I've been considering is with my daughter, trying to identify some of this stuff, like, what is it that she needs to do and what is it that she wants to do, and try to put those things together for her in a way that's pleasant. Because like one of the things I'm trying to teach her to do is wash her hands. And she's very little. She's only like 9 months old, so washing her hands is difficult. But one of the ways I've been getting around that is she really likes
to dip her hands in the toilet because she can reach.
Yeah, right. Yeah. No, she really likes to be like picked up and carried around. And so the last thing that we do after a meal is I make sure that it's like wash her hands, and as soon as she's done with it, she gets picked up. Like it's just like, oh yay, like I'm about to be done. I really genuinely think that she's enjoying that more. Like she'll like put her hands in, she'll kind of like look at me like, do I get picked up yet? And that's been a fun thing for now. Of course it'll change, but just looking for other little opportunities like that.
I think that's a great idea. I think that's something I've been looking for with my son too. And he's a little bit older, so I wish that I had these sorts of thoughts and concepts earlier. So yeah. I think you're going to have a lot of success with that.
Yeah, I hope so. Thank you for joining us, book friends. Next week on the BFTTG pod, Jack and Weston, they're thinking good some more with you, our book friends. Check out the show notes or the description, comment section for a link to the book and any articles that we talk about in the show. Bye-bye, book friends.
Bye for this time, guys.
Do a good thing today.
I love you.
Love you too, dude.